There's a statistic that should bother you more than it probably does. Over the last 500 years, historians have identified 16 cases where a rising power challenged a ruling one. In 12 of those cases, 12 out of 16, it ended in war. The rivalry between the United States and China is case number 17.
Call it what you want. Not a Cold War. No troops massed on borders. No nuclear standoffs over Caribbean islands. Something newer and in some ways stranger. A contest fought inside semiconductor fabrication plants, undersea fiber optic cables, university research departments, and the metadata of 1 billion social media accounts. Most people don't realize how far along it already is. Go back to 2011.
That year, the Obama administration announced the pivot to Asia, a quiet but decisive shift in American foreign policy. Washington had spent a decade consumed by Iraq and Afghanistan. Time, the thinking went, to pay attention to the power that was actually rising. For 3 decades before that, U.S. policy toward China had rested on a bet that economic engagement would gradually liberalize the country. Let China into the global trading system, and prosperity would eventually produce political reform. It was a reasonable bet. A lot of smart people made it. By 2011, it was clear the bet had failed.
China had grown enormously wealthy and had not, in the process, become more open. Its military was modernizing at speed. Its technology sector was expanding with explicit state backing. And Beijing was increasingly willing to use economic power as a geopolitical instrument, not just as a side effect of its growth, but as a deliberate tool. Acknowledging this was what the pivot was for. In 2015, Beijing published a document called Made in China 2025. It wasn't subtle. 132 pages, translated into English almost immediately. A government blueprint for achieving global leadership in 10 strategic industries: artificial intelligence, 5G telecommunications, robotics, advanced semiconductors, electric vehicles, dominance in several of these sectors targeted by 2035, full technology self-sufficiency by 2049, the centenary of the People's Republic. This wasn't corporate strategy. It was a state declaring its intention to displace American technological supremacy in writing for the world to read. Washington's response was, eventually, panic. Because the United States had spent decades offshoring its manufacturing base, including, critically, its semiconductor production. The chips that power everything from smartphones to fighter jets, from hospital monitors to guided missiles, were being fabricated overwhelmingly in East Asia. The most advanced capacity sat in Taiwan, an island Beijing considers a breakaway province, 110 miles off its coast. America had handed a potential adversary leverage over its own defense infrastructure, not through espionage or sabotage, through the ordinary logic of efficiency. Artificial intelligence is the obvious flashpoint.
On paper, China holds real advantages: vast data sets, fewer privacy constraints, and a civil-military fusion strategy that routes private sector innovation directly into the People's Liberation Army. The United States retains the edge in the most advanced chips and frontier AI models, an edge that is real and narrowing.
What underlies all of it is the semiconductor itself. A modern chip, the kind that goes into a fighter jet's targeting system or a large language model's training cluster, requires photolithographic equipment so precise that only one company on Earth manufactures it. That company is ASML, headquartered in Eindhoven in the Netherlands. One company, one mid-sized Dutch city. Once you know that, the entire logic of export controls snaps into focus. Washington has moved aggressively. Entity lists, the CHIPS and Science Act of 2022, allocating $52 billion to rebuild domestic production, a strategy officials describe as small yard, high fence, tight restrictions on the most sensitive technologies while keeping broader economic ties intact.
Here's the problem. The yard keeps getting bigger, and the fence keeps getting harder to maintain. Meanwhile, and this part gets less public attention than it deserves, the competition isn't confined to laboratories.
China operates one of the most sophisticated information operations in the world, broadcasting state media in 75 languages. The United Front Work Department, an organization with roots in Leninist cell-building theory dating to the 1940s, which matters more than it sounds, runs networks targeting Western universities, diaspora communities, think tanks, and political figures, often through organizations that don't advertise their connections to Beijing. Bot networks see disinformation around Taiwan, Hong Kong, and U.S. electoral politics across Western platforms.
And then there's the Belt and Road Initiative. Framed as infrastructure investment for the developing world, it has given Beijing strategic presence over ports, railways, and telecommunications networks across Asia, Africa, and parts of Europe. More than 140 countries have signed on in some form. The comparison to the Marshall Plan is often made, but the Marshall Plan was grants. The Belt and Road is loans. When countries can't repay, Beijing has shown willingness to accept what analysts call debt trap equity. The port of Hambantota in Sri Lanka, leased to a Chinese state company for 99 years in 2017, is the most cited example. Whether this reflects deliberate strategic design or improvised opportunism is genuinely debated among people who study it closely. The effect is roughly the same either way. So where does this leave the United States? Aggressive decoupling might slow China's military modernization, but it risks fracturing the innovation ecosystem that produced American technological dominance in the first place. That ecosystem has always depended on global talent and the open movement of ideas. Roughly half the engineers in Silicon Valley were born outside the United States. A significant number were born in China. What that means for national security and what you do about it without destroying the thing you're trying to protect is a question Washington has not cleanly resolved. And underneath all of this, barely surfacing in public debate, there's a nuclear dimension that has quietly grown more dangerous. What defense planners call the two-peer problem is not hypothetical. For the first time since the Cold War, the United States faces two nuclear-armed adversaries, China and Russia, both modernizing simultaneously. American nuclear doctrine was designed to deter a single-peer competitor. That doctrine is being revised in classified annexes right now. The geometry of deterrence hasn't been this complicated since 1991, possibly since 1983. The original Cold War ended with one side simply collapsing under its own contradictions. Nobody expects that this time. China is not the Soviet Union. Its economy is too deeply woven into the global system, too adaptive, too large to implode. The United States is not the America of 1950 either. Its domestic consensus is fractured. Its infrastructure is aging. Its political institutions are under pressures they were not designed for. What the two countries are constructing, slowly and without much public acknowledgement, is a world divided not by walls or borders, but by supply chains, software standards, undersea cables, and satellite constellations. Two parallel systems, two internets, two competing answers to the question of how a society should be organized. The Thucydides trap has closed before, 12 times out of 16. Whether this becomes one of the lucky 4 depends on decisions being made right now, in rooms most of us will never enter, about technologies most of us don't fully understand. History offers no guarantees. It does, though, tend to rhyme.